There's a Native American proverb that says we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. We have a responsibility to be good stewards of the earth. And Native Plant Channel tries to help everyone create better ecosystems on their property, whether or not they garden. I'm Lourdes, and I'm here with a person who needs no introduction, really. He is the leader of the native plant movement and the leader in trying to get everyone to create better ecosystems on their property in order really to save the world, because that's the situation that we're in. We are losing birds, we are losing insects, and we can't survive without the work that insects do for us. So Dr. Tallamy is here today. He's going to help us with teaching us more about ecological landscaping, what we can do on our properties, and we're here at Mount Cuba Center. Dr. Tallamy, can you tell us a little bit more about Mount Cuba Center and how this place is so important to us?
Sure. Mount Cuba Center is a DuPont estate. It was the home of Mrs. Lamont DuPont Copeland, who lived here from the 30s on until her death. She died in her 90s. And her hobby was to collect native plants, particularly native plants of the Piedmont in the east. So all the places we're going to visit today was a cornfield in the 30s, and she reconstructed all of it. Many lessons in that. One of them is that nature's really resilient. Nature can recover from a lot of what we throw at her. She's not endlessly resilient, but she can recover if we give her half a chance. Another important lesson is that you can garden with natives formally. If you look behind us, we've got a formal, what would you call it, water feature, formal little pool. Cool. Yet it's surrounded with native plants that are loaded with tiger swallowtails, several species of skippers, all kinds of pollinators, hummingbird moths. These are things I saw just while Lourdes was setting up. Diversity, they are here because the flowering plants are here. Now the things we don't see, all the caterpillars and the birds and the things that are a lot more hidden from us during the day are here as well. But many of them come out at night, so it's a little harder to find them. The butterflies they're in our face, and we do have a lot of them. Here's one right here.
Yes, if you notice throughout, you'll see that this proves that if you plant it, they will come. The insects, the butterflies, all the pollinators, they're just waiting for us to help them out by using native plants.
There is some urgency, though. They will come if they're still here.
If they're still here, yes.
We cannot wait forever for them to disappear, because we are in the middle of the 6th great extinction event that the planet has ever experienced. And it's important to recognize our responsibility in Earth stewardship, not because we're nice guys, but because we absolutely need the ecosystem services, the life support that nature provides. So in the old days, we had this idea that nature's out there and we humans are here, and that the two can't coexist. We've got to toss that idea, because humans are everywhere. So if we expel nature every place we go, then we have ecosystem collapse, and we'll be in big trouble. And unfortunately, the statistics are showing that's the direction we're headed. We've lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years, a third of our North American bird population already gone. We're in global insect decline. We've lost almost 50% of the insects on the planet. And as E.O. Wilson told us, they are the little things that run the world. The fortunate thing is that these things are reversible. There are a number of things we can do to rebuild insect populations so that they pollinate the plants, so that the plants produce the caterpillars that are the bread and butter of terrestrial food webs, so that the birds have something to eat. All of these things can come together again if we choose the right plants. So that's one of the things we're gonna talk about today. But while we're still here, I want you to notice how densely that this area is planted. It's a formal garden, but you can't see the ground in most places. And that minimizes your weeding jobs. If you have a lot of mulch and big open spaces, you're ultimately going to have to weed that. So planting very densely to the point where you can't see the ground is one of the ways you can minimize maintenance in the future. It also it protects the temperature of the soil and maintains the moisture in the soil. I just got off a webinar in Texas where they've had more than 30 straight days above 100 degrees. When you have bare soil or even soil open to mulch in that kind of a environment, it heats up the soil community and essentially kills a lot of them. So our soil community is really important. There's more species that live in the soil than above the soil, and they are the things that are breaking down leaf litter, returning the nutrients to the soil. Then the mycorrhizal fungi take those nutrients and deliver them to the plants. It's a closed system if you protect the soil environment, and that's what these above ground plants are doing. So planting densely, a lot of advantages to it. So the problem is that the biodiversity that runs the ecosystems that we all depend on is all huddled in these little parks and preserves, and it's not enough. The populations of the plants and animals in those preserves, the things that run the ecosystems that produce the life support that we all depend on, those populations are not big enough now. So the obvious solution is to practice conservation outside of those parks and preserves on private property, and that's what we're talking about all the time these days. How do we start living with nature? In the past, we've had this idea that humans and nature can't coexist. Nature's someplace else. Nature doesn't have to be someplace else. As a matter of fact, and here's two butterflies making a very nice display.
This is absolutely fantastic because as we've, from the minute we stepped here, there are butterflies fluttering all over.
That, by the way, that was two tiger swallowtails. The male is yellow, but there's a black morph of the female. Some of the females are yellow, but others are black. So it wasn't two different species. We're in the Mount Cuba trial garden now, which is it's a place where you can plant a number of varieties and cultivars of a particular plant right next to each other, and then evaluate them for beauty, but also for ecological performance. Right here is a planting of swamp milkweed. When we walked up, there was a monarch butterfly here. Now this is August 2023. I've gone all the way to this point this year, and I've only seen one monarch. So the one we just saw here was monarch number 2. There he goes, right there, which illustrates the problem. Monarch was a very common butterfly. It's now red listed. We've lost at least 96% of them, and we've done it because we've taken away the two things they need. One is milkweed, various species of milkweed, that's where they breed, but they also migrate to Mexico in the fall, well, starting late August and September, and they need forage all the way. And by forage, I mean plants that make nectar. So if you're trying to help the monarch, planting those fall blooming plants like goldenrod and asters and New York ironweed and Enothera, all kinds of things that bloom in the fall are critically important to getting monarchs down to their overwintering station. This is last-ditch effort, folks. In California, they've lost 99% of their monarchs. We've lost 96%. It is time to get these plants back in our landscapes. And because monarchs are so mobile, putting them in your yard helps. They will find it. They will help find it. So it doesn't have to be a natural area. We're still in the trial garden, and this is a trial of various types of New York ironweed. They come in different heights, so that's one of the things that is being looked at here. Of course, you put tall plants in the back, short plants in the front, but this is a very important plant because it's one of those fall bloomers that monarchs really depend on when they're migrating, but it also supports pollinators at the end of the season. If we're planting a pollinator garden, you want to plant for the specialist pollinators that require particular species of pollen to reproduce. The generalist pollinators like honeybees and bumblebees will use those plants as well. So having plants that bloom sequentially from April all the way through October is critically important in your pollinator garden. One thing I want to say about New York ironweed is that you typically find it in a wetter area. And people say, well, if I don't have a wet area, I can't plant it. Not so. It is in a wet area because it does well there, and there are many plants that don't. Not because it requires a wet area. So there's a number of plants like New York ironweed, like swamp milkweed, like buttonbush, like clethra, like winterberry. They can grow in standing water, but they don't require it. So you can put them up in dry areas as well, and they'll perform their ecological services there too. And of course, it's a beautiful plant.
I was fortunate to work with Dr. Tallamy last summer, and where he mentioned the study that he's doing on soft landings. So, Dr. Tallamy, I'd really like for you to explain maybe what you have discovered so far regarding that study.
Soft landing refers to caterpillars that complete their development up in the canopy of a tree, and then in order to actually complete their development, they complete their growth in the canopy of the tree, but in order to become adults, they have to go through a pupal stage. And most of them, 94%, will drop from the tree and burrow their way underground and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's on the ground. And if you think of the typical way we landscape around our trees, it's typically grass or bare ground. So soft landing means that the caterpillar will drop down and encounter a landscape that is not compacted. So a well-planted landscape like you see here, there's a very big tulip tree here, but this is a ironwood, a carpinus. Any of those trees could be producing caterpillars, and when they drop down, it's a very favorable environment for those caterpillars to get underground. So I have a grad student, Emma Jonas, who's doing a great job with this, and what she knows so far is that soil compaction is one of the major issues. Caterpillars, of course, don't have any digging apparatus. They get underground by just nosing it aside with their head capsule. And if they find loose soil, something that hasn't been walked on or ridden on with a riding mower, it is much easier for them to get underground. Grass, lawn, by the way, has very dense thatch, very difficult for a caterpillar to plow through that. Emma has looked at the typical landscape under trees in 760 landscapes so far across the east, and she has found that I think it's 85% of the ground cover under our trees in our yards is lawn. So no big surprise, but now we have a number on it. That's something we really need to change. So what I'm encouraging people to do is to put a bed under all of your trees. The bigger the better. That's a great way to reduce the area you have in lawn, because lawn does not accomplish any of the ecological goals that every landscape has. And those ecological goals are support pollinators, sequester carbon, support a food web, and manage the watershed. Turfgrass is the worst plant choice for doing all of those. So you're reducing, by putting a bed under your trees, you're reducing the area of lawn, and you're helping all of those caterpillars. And just to review, we need caterpillars because they are the bread and butter that feeds so many other creatures in our landscape. I got a picture this summer of an ornate box turtle. That's a turtle used to be common in the Midwest, is now not common at all. But it's got a caterpillar hanging out of its mouth. There are records from the 50s where they would follow armyworm and cutworm invasions and eat hundreds a day. So I'm just telling you that because it's not just birds that depend on caterpillars. Thousands and thousands of caterpillars to get one nest of bird through to maturity. It's an awful lot of things. So the more caterpillars we can make in our landscapes, the healthier it is. You know, I hear a lot, people get excited, they want to reduce the area of lawn, they want to make their property more ecologically friendly, so they said, I'm going to make a meadow. I'm just going to stop mowing. Well, if you stop mowing cool season Eurasian grasses, and that's what our turf grass is, you have tall cool season Eurasian grasses. It's not a native meadow. And as a matter of fact, I don't want to discourage anybody, but creating a meadow, creating a prairie is one of the hardest things to do, particularly if you're starting from grass, because grass is really competitive. You can't just throw a bunch of seeds out there. You can change your mowing schedule. So if you mow heavily in the spring and then don't mow the rest of the summer, and you do that 2 or 3 years in a row, it suppresses the cool season grasses and encourages the warm season bunch grasses, which are native. And then the herbs start to come in. But this is it's a wonderful meadow. We're here in mid to late August, and it's been a delayed year. There's a lot of goldenrod out there, but none of it's in bloom yet. In a week or two, this is going to be a blaze of yellow. It'll be beautiful. But it's extremely functional. Keep in mind, not only do you have a lot of diversity in a meadow, a lot of herbaceous plants, but these meadow plants have very deep roots. And they are pumping carbon into the ground through those root systems almost as well as a mature forest does. The carbon sequestered in a meadow/prairie is just below what's sequestered in a mature forest. Seems hard to believe, but that's because of all the carbon that these plants are pumping into the ground. It's another advantage of limiting lawn, because grass roots have very grass has very short roots, and they're very poor at sequestering carbon. And any carbon they sequester, we mow and release the next time we mow. So having a planting like this is wonderful for managing the watershed. It's wonderful for sequestering carbon. It's perfect for the diversity of pollinators, and it is also filled with plants that pass on energy they capture from the sun and support the food web. So a meadow like this does it all, but it's not particularly easy.
And that's an important point that you made about the soil as well, because most people, treat their soil like dirt when soil is really a living thing.
So we mentioned how well these prairie meadow plants sequester carbon in the soil. Once it's in the soil, it's very stable. It can actually stay in soil for thousands of years if the soil is not disturbed. Every time we plow it up or turn it over with our shovels or our spades, we're releasing most of the carbon that was stored there. You can't see it, but it volatilizes and it's gone. So keeping areas undisturbed on your property as long as possible is a really good thing. And another reason to keep disturbance out is that disturbance is the friend of invasive plants. The first thing that comes in when you disturb an area are the invasive plants that are, remember the definition of an invasive, it's a plant from someplace else that is pushing out native plants. And those plants from someplace else, from another continent, are very poor at supporting the food web. So minimized disturbance will help manage your invasive load as well. What you see behind me is a very nice planting of Joe Pye weed. This is August. Joe Pye blooms from early August right through to the end. It's a tall, leggy plant, and it's one of those plants that a lot of people don't want to use because it's a native and it's tall and leggy and it'll fall over. But what you see behind us is a perfect way to plant it. You mass it. You don't have one Joe Pye weed. You have a number of them together. It's a beautiful display. It's wonderful for pollinators because they don't have to fly far to get from one flower to the next. Okay, we're back in the meadow. You see a number of things in bloom: Joe Pye weed, tick seed, and it reminds me of how poorly we have marketed our native plants. We call so many of them weeds: milkweed, New York ironweed, Joe Pye weed. Tick seed has nothing to do with ticks. Sneezeweed does not make you sneeze, but they're all negative connotations. The reason so many of our native plants are called weeds is because when Europeans came over and started agriculture in the way they did it in Europe, which was to plant a single crop and exclude everything else, any plant that grew up in those fields, and they were all natives, of course, they named a weed, and that's how they got these names. But of course, people don't want to plant weeds. But remember what a weed is. A weed is a plant out of place. Our native plants are not out of place. So I'd love to see them renamed. Let's rename milkweed's Monarch's Delight, or tick seed is what Helen's flower, something like that. They're much more friendly. Alanthus, terrible invasive, is called Tree of Heaven. Paulownia is called princess trees. I mean, we're very good to our invasive plants.
Something like this, although it will take some effort, it will take some years, and you should start small when doing it, but isn't this a lot more attractive than just a 2-inch tall grass in your garden? Isn't this a lot more, it definitely is a lot more supportive of all kinds of life than that grass is? So consider some small version of this in your yard.
One more thing, it's also a great example of what I call a savanna landscape. So we've got a big dogwood here, a couple big dogwoods, and they're casting some shade, but these meadow prairie plants are right up and underneath it. And this is the most diverse type of landscape we can have, having our really productive trees with a meadow type understory. So a perfect example of that. And very few people would object to that, even in a suburban yard. We are looking at a small planting of one of the species of gentians, and a lot of people, what beautiful buds, they're waiting for the flowers to open. The flowers are open. They actually never spread their petals apart. They require pollination by a bumblebee that is strong enough to peel those flowers open, or the petals open, and they crawl inside and pollinate it. But it's a very specialized relationship. If you don't have the bumblebee, you don't get your gentian pollinated, and then the gentian will disappear. And that is true for so many of our pollinator plant relationships. We have about 4,000 species of native bees, and a third of them can only reproduce in the pollen of particular plants. So if you lose those plants, you lose, 1,500 species of bees. It's one of the reasons when we plant pollinator gardens, we want to plant for the specialists, because the generalists can use those plants as well. If you plant for the generalists, and many of our non-native plants do serve as generalists, but you lose all the specialists when you do that. When we realized that we need to start practicing conservation outside of parks and preserves, that's on private property. And most of the land, particularly east of the Mississippi, is privately owned, about 85% of it. That makes the private landowner the future of conservation. Big problem is they don't know that. So it's one of the reasons that Michelle Alfandari and I started Homegrown National Park. It's a small nonprofit. You can go to homegrownnationalpark.org. And the object is to get the message that we all are responsible for conservation on our properties, get that to the general public. We want that message to go viral. So we're using social media. We've got on the website, there's the map of the US. You can register your property, the location, and the amount of area you're going to be a good steward of. So maybe you really are going to reduce the area of lawn, or plant an oak tree, or put an aster in a flower pot. All of that counts. Then your little piece of your county will light up, and the object is to get the whole country to light up. It's free, by the way. It doesn't cost anything. We want to record on this map all of the good conservation that's happening on private property. We've got Audubon, we've got Sierra Club, we've got National Wildlife Federation. They're all doing wonderful jobs, all the land conservancies, but nobody's recording it in a unified way on a single source. We're never going to get to the 30 by 30 goal of preserving 30% of the U.S. by 2030 unless we record conservation on private property. So it's another motivation for having the Homegrown National Park map. Each state is color-coded depending on the number of participants. So you can look at your state and see how you're doing in the national competition to register people on the map. But we're trying to change the culture. You get people to realize that nature's not optional, it's essential. It's much more than entertainment. We want to change our relationship from an adversarial one with nature to a collaborative one. Those are all the messages of Homegrown National Park, and all of that's on the website. I encourage you to visit it and sign up. Okay, there's so many things to say about some type of water feature in your native landscape. Research in recent years has shown that water features of just about any kind that are naturally planted are excellent at holding carbon. They capture carbon, and the muck at the bottom of a little pond or a marsh will store that carbon for years and years and years and years. So maintaining a water system in your property, if you have the option, is a wonderful way to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. A lot of people are reluctant to do that. They're worried about mosquitoes. But keep in mind, when you have a permanent body of water like this, mosquitoes, it does not produce mosquitoes, because it's not that mosquitoes don't lay eggs in there, but all the things that eat mosquitoes. And that's just about everything in an aquatic system. All of the dragonflies and damselflies and predaceous diving beetles, the hemipterans, the various bugs that live in water, they all eat mosquito larvae. It's temporary bodies of water that produce mosquitoes where you don't have those predators because the body of water is not there long enough. So don't be afraid of having a permanent body of water. It will not be a mosquito producer. And you can also add fish. The fish eat mosquitoes all the time as well. And then it is a source of water for your birds. Birds need water like anything else. You can have a little bubbling water feature, or you can have a permanent pond system like this. It enables you to use plants that do well in water. So in a system like this, notice that the edges are heavily planted with water-loving plants. The average homeowner can put in plants like button bush, sweet pepper bush, winterberry. Those plants can grow in standing water and give you productivity throughout the year, particularly winterberry, those beautiful red berries all winter long. Willows rank right under oaks in terms of caterpillar productivity, making all of those caterpillars. What you don't want is a grassy area right down to the water with no plants next to it. And unfortunately, I see that all the time, particularly if that grass is fertilized, because where does the fertilizer go? Right into the pond. Then you get algal blooms, and it's a big mess. What you're also looking at around this pond is the proper use of lawn. Turf grass is the perfect place to walk. So that's its function. You plant it where there's going to be a lot of foot traffic, but it should not be wall-to-wall carpeting. There are a lot of insects that are produced by aquatic systems. There's something called midges in the family Chironomidae. They look a lot like mosquitoes, but they do not bite. They're a really important component of bat diets. We're trying to bring our bats back from the white nose disease that killed so many of them. They're flying around at dusk and at night eating a lot of aquatic insects that come out of these types of systems. Crane flies, really important bat food. You know, martins, people want to have a big martin house and raise martins because they eat mosquitoes. We actually looked at the diets of martins, and particularly when the parents are rearing their young, they rear them almost exclusively on dragonflies. Well, they're not eating the mosquitoes, but they are eating dragonflies that are produced by the pond. So again, everything's connected. You need the pond in order to have terrestrial birds, and if you eliminate their food, you're not going to have them. All of these aerial gleaning birds, the swifts, the swallows, the martins, are declining rapidly. It's one of our most rapidly declining groups of birds because we're not producing the insects that fly around in the air anymore. So please, there's no reason for insecticides at home, with the one exception of termites. And if you have termites, you get a professional termite service. They're actually very good these days. They put a wood bait in the ground, find out where the termite nest is, and then they lace that bait, and the termites take it back to their colony. It's very directed. They're not spraying chloridane all around the base of your house the way we did back in the 60s and 70s. So minimize insecticide use. Stay away from neonicotinoids. Neonicotinoids are 7,000 times more toxic to insects than DDT was. There are studies now that show that in many parts of the country, there's neonicotinoids in our rain because of all of the neonicotinoid use, both in suburban landscapes and in agriculture. And we're not sure just how much that's contributing to insect declines, but it's not good. So if you get an insect in your yard, if you have everybody wants to get rid of spiders. Remember, spiders are eating the mosquitoes that you don't like. Get what I call the spider removal kit. It's called a jar. You put it over the spider, shake it a little bit, he's into it, and take it outside. Otherwise, you're living in an envelope of insecticide, of poison. And who knows what the long-term consequences of that are. Remember, insects are our friends. We're not going to be on this planet long without them. So let's be a little bit nicer to them.
Dr. Tallamy, so many of us are so excited that you have come out with Nature's Best Hope, the young readers version, so that we can teach our young people to appreciate insects, to appreciate plants, to learn about their ecosystems, and to do something to preserve it. Because after all, we are here only for a short time, and the next generation has to be able to take over and to be able to witness things like butterflies, lightning bugs, things that will not be around if we don't protect them now. So we're so excited that you've come up with this book for children.
I'm going to give Timber Press the credit for that. It was their idea to actually make a young readers version, but it's a wonderful idea because the young people on the planet today are the future stewards of the planet, and the big problem is they don't know that. So, as a matter of fact, the media vilifies nature so often that more kids are scared to go outside, scared of something that will happen to them, than love it these days. That's a terrible state of affairs, because if the future stewards of the planet are afraid to be stewards, don't know what good stewardship is, they're going to be lousy stewards, and we can't afford any more of that. And it's another advantage of having a water feature like this, because it's a wonderful way to introduce your kids to the wonders of nature. When you have a little pond like this, I'm speaking from experience. This is how I got into nature. There was a little pond right next door to my house. And in the spring, toads come and they lay their eggs, they sing, they breed, and the pollywogs are swimming around. And I could still see myself hunkered down next to the pond watching all of that happen. Nobody was teaching me. My parents weren't there holding my hand. I was just out there by myself. Those are the experiences we want to give our kids these days, so that they come away with a wonder of nature, an appreciation of nature. Even if they don't understand everything they're seeing, they want to go back and they see more. If you can do that right in your yard, that's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. That little pond next to my house when I was growing up became my neighbor's backyard. The bulldozer came and buried the pond and everything in it. What I'm still sad about is that I didn't realize I could go over to my backyard and dig another pond. My parents would have supported it. I could have had that same system right in my yard, but it never occurred to me. That's one of the goals of Nature's Best Hope Young Readers version, is to tell the kids they can do it right in their yard. They don't need the government's permission. They can save life right where they live. It's a wonderful experience and extremely rewarding.
And some of you might be thinking, well, I don't have the size of property to put a pond in my yard, but there are all kinds of water features, from bird baths to fountains, to a number of water features that you can include in a small corner of your yard that will also attract insects and wildlife, even little salamanders and toads. Everyone can participate in making our world a better place. It's actions that we have to take right now. And they start small. They can start with just a few native plants. They should start small so that you don't become overwhelmed. But there's so much that each of us can do. There is so much property in the United States that can go from lawn to native plants, and that will help all of us in so many ways. I want to thank Dr. Tallamy and Mount Cuba Center for having us here today, for showing us around, for giving us so much inspiration and so much information that we can use in our own home. Thank you, Dr. Tallamy.
You're welcome. Thank you for doing this. This is a great service to society.
Thank you, everyone at home. Have a great day.